Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me Josh Rubin, who is the founder of East-West Healing, and he specializes in helping people improve their thyroid and metabolic health to increase their energy, to overcome various health problems and symptoms, and to just feel better overall. So welcome to the show, Josh Rubin.
Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, I would love for you to talk a bit about your background and your story as far as how you got into doing what you do, why you founded East-West Healing, and how you came to specialize in thyroid health specifically.
It's been a long journey, to be honest with you. I mean, I got my degree originally in occupational therapy, and that's like 18 years ago. And that was really boring, to be honest with you. And that kind of led me to start personal training. I'm going through this quickly and really just finding Paul Chek at the time. And his institute was a big catalyst in driving me to where I am today. So I, did all the certs. I ended up teaching for him all around the globe for about 8 or 9 years. And that led me to obviously discovering different certifications, different courses, went to Chinese medicine school, osteopathic manual therapy school in Canada for 5 years, and it just kept going. But the main thing was through teaching for them, I always was really interested in physiology and just how the body worked, not from a disease perspective, not from a dysfunction perspective, but just how the body worked. And it's anatomy and physiology. It's just been something I've always been into. And just through all that, kind of learning about Ray P and all these different endocrinologists and physiologists and biochemists, and it really kind of led me to the path of we come into this world as a cell and we multiply and we're a conglomeration of cells. And that's really where my passion, started to happen. And looking at and saying, well, our body is nature, and it's very powerful, and its goal is to create health. And if we give our body what it needs, nature will do the rest. And that's an old osteopathic quote from 1847 by Andrew Taylor Still. And I truly believe that. So while everyone's out there chasing symptoms, my goal is how can I help people to change their environment to create health? So that's what led me down we say thyroid, but it's really cellular, energy production, because the 37.2 trillion cells in your body need thyroid hormone to work properly, and those govern the system like a conductor. So that's kind of what led me to where I am today. I run the business with my wife, and we're very passionate about the work we do.
Yeah, awesome. So I like that distinction that you just made. So creating health versus sort of trying to fix symptoms and disease. Right. Talk to me a bit more about what that distinction really is, because I think for a lot of people listening, they may not be clear about what that really means. So if you can sort of make it practical, what does that look like in terms of how you're practicing differently from, let's say, someone else who is chasing symptoms or disease?
Right, 100%. And a lot of what I'm going to say is not judgmental. It's just my experience, because I know some people get triggered. I was part of that group back in the day. It was like someone comes in with candida, let's treat candida. They did a lab, let's give them the supplement protocol, let's treat candida, or someone's got labs, let's analyze the labs and treat the labs. Or someone has, ulcerative colitis, or someone has adrenal fatigue, whatever it may be. We start treating the system, or we start treating the lab. The problem is everyone's forgetting about the person. No one's looking at where they've come from. Something that really resonates with us is the work of Gabor Mate. And he says, you are everything from conception till now. And we truly believe that, right? So we had this revelation one day where everyone's coming to us with tons of labs, stacks of labs. They're on 45 supplements, but we're part of this, and we're forgetting about the person. We're forgetting about talking about their history, their traumas, whether it be emotional, physical, nutritional, everything's a trauma, right? The state of their emotional state, how they're working out, if they're overtraining or not. So we got away from that because that's what chasing symptoms is all about. It's protocol after protocol, supplement after supplement, lab after lab. And it's no different than allopathic medicine. I call it greeniopathy because allopathic medicine is a philosophy. We do a lab, we give you a medication, the labs are fine, and you feel like shit, it doesn't matter. The labs are fine, you're fine, it's in your head. That's treating the symptom. Labs and supplements is the same thing, but that's what our industry is evolved to, you know. And I'm not, and I know you just came out with a supplement. I'm not poo-pooing supplements. I'm not saying I never use supplements. Yeah. I just don't agree with how they're being used because they're using just like medications. The foundation isn't there. People still have trouble sleeping. They're staying up all night. They're on 24/7 on their phone. Beside the light, the stress of being on your phone, right? They work all day, they don't eat, and then they go work out, which is a physiological, it's just physiological stress. It's like the example of getting on a roller coaster is a stress. We have a stress system to regulate that. It's not a bad stress, but if you did that every day, all day, for 10 years, tell me how your physiology would be. And that's what people are doing. Just like the example of you're running from a lion every day physiologically. You're not going to poop, want to have sex, or want to eat food and digest it when you're running from a lion, right? So we moved away from that and said, we're really going to, instead of being pushed away from believing that the body is powerful, we're going to bring people back to that so they can discover really who they are, kind of decompensate, go through their bullshit, get vulnerable, and say, okay, I'm going to trust the body. And I know if I give my body what it needs on a daily basis, whether it be sleep, whether it be me time, their emotional state, food frequency, that's our approach. And really looking at it from a cellular perspective, which is body temperature pulse, which is what we use, we know the body's going to create health. And the best example is this. You know, if you get some seeds and you know if you plant them in organic soil and you water them and you give them sunlight, they're going to grow, right? That is creating health. You just chop wood, carry water. You just do it because you know it's going to work, right? And you trust the process. You trust the soil. You trust nature. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to something you said a minute ago, which is it's worth noting I've actually been one of the most vocal critics of what functional medicine has become among many practitioners. And I've talked about this in many podcasts. So, a lot of the listeners will be aware of this, but I'll mention that I actually heard a bio, a person's sort of background, sort of story about what they do. And they were introduced on this interview, and their main shtick was, this is not an exact quote, but this is basically what it said. It said, what I do is I take people through at-home functional medicine tests, and then I prescribe custom supplement protocols to deal with their health problems. And I actually posted this in my Facebook group for my Energy Blueprint members. And I said, what's wrong with this picture? And my group is a smart bunch, so they immediately identified what was wrong with it. And what's wrong with it is this person's thing is basically an allopathic paradigm, exactly as you pointed out. It's basically just replacing drugs with supplements, but right. It's what's called green allopathy. It's basically just what's the supplement, what's the lab test that shows this particular thing is off, and let's find whatever supplement is necessary that to correspond to that lab test. Right. And a lot of these lab tests have literally printed on them, like there's a mitochondrial dysfunction lab test or organic acids test and things like that. And they'll say, hey, if this marker is high, prescribe CoQ10 and B vitamins and stuff like that. And I cannot stand this. I think there's so many problems with, first of all, a lot of the tests are not even scientifically valid and are just silly tests that have not actually been validated and are junk data. That's a problem I talked about recently in one of my podcasts with Dr. Alan Christensen. But then another bigger problem, which is what you're getting at, is that there's a fundamental flaw in the whole paradigm behind it, which is that they're chasing symptoms instead of creating health.
Right. And I think people got so, and I'll admit, like back in the day, there's a huge gray area because I was a therapist, I could do labs. And they came out, it was like biohealth, and everyone was metametrics, and it was like boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, what am I doing? Because it's like, I'm forgetting about the person in front of me. And it's just like rabbit hole. And, you know, we get amazing results with people that have spent $20, $30, $40,000 working with the best of the best, doing labs upon labs. They have fatigue, IBS, SIBO, whatever you want to do it. And we're helping people heal with food. But not just food, they have to change. And that's the biggest difference between what we're doing. And I think, I'm not saying we're the only ones doing it, but it's like we're asking people to change. We're not even saying you're going to do nutrition but be the same person. We're saying you have to change, and no other practitioner is doing that. They're saying here's this diet that you're going to follow, but you're really not changing. You're not changing who you are. You're not changing your life. You're not changing your physiology. So for us, it's really about that change, and we have to do that because that's the only way. You know, it's like you have to change either your perception of your environment or your environment to create change of the internal environment and have an impact on your nervous system, which is the driver of everything. And that's really our approach. It's how do we regulate energy to create autoregulation in our nervous system? Because if you don't do that, you're never going to heal, no matter how awesome the supplement is, how awesome the philosophy is. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
So I will say that I'm an advocate of certain supplements and compound supplements. I think they can be extremely beneficial, and there's lots of research to support that. But supplements are supplements. They're meant to be supplementary to the foundation of nutrition and lifestyle, 100%.
Yeah, we have specific ones we use with people when needed. It's a toolbox, right? You know, but we always say food first. The foundation has to be there. We want people's nervous system and certain things to be happening with how they feel, their food logs that we use, and body temperature pulse. Because if not, we believe that supplement might not be used correctly or converted correctly or broken down correctly. So we always say food first. That's kind of our thing.
Gotcha. So talk to me about what your approach to nutrition actually is, and can we get into some of the sort of the framework of it or some of the specifics of what you do on the nutrition front?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way it's rolled out with each individual is obviously individualized. But the main premise is how can we use metabolic digestible foods to downregulate the stress response in our system through blood sugar regulation, right? Because stress is the perceived need for sugar. So we know if we regulate our blood sugar, we can take the burden off the adrenals and begin to quiet the heightened system down. And when we do that, and we're storing that energy, we can convert thyroid hormone, and we can use that within the cell to produce or begin to produce energy, which begins to increase vagal tone or strengthen that side and create autoregulation within the nervous system. So scientifically or biochemically, that's kind of our approach. So what we're teaching people is initially, okay, here's metabolic food. Here are your proteins, carbs, and fats that we want you to start using. And it's beyond that, because we find that most people have to get comfortable buying the food, you know, preparing the food, and just get comfortable using it. Because for some people, it's very different. You know, a lot of people are eating high carb, low protein, high fat diets. That's like the standard American diet when you really look at it from a log perspective, as well as people coming in, whether they're vegetarian or they're fasting. You know, people are in a very compromised state. So we know that when we begin to meet their needs with that food, which is digestible, we take the burden off the system, and then we start working with frequency of the food, but it's individualized to the person. So it takes a little bit of fine tuning, because when we do that, it's like having a baby and saying, I know my child, right? You have children, right? You know exactly when your children need to eat, right? Doesn't mean if my friend has a boy that's 2.5 years old, like my son, that he's going to eat at the same time, right? They're all different based on when they wake up, based on their needs, etc. So the frequency through fine tuning is individualized, and it's very important because that again reduces the stress response, because we're teaching the liver to store glycogen again, which is one of the hallmark signs of the stress response or being in a hypometabolic, hypothyroid state, right? So when we do that, it's very powerful, right? We really give the body a foundation to work from, and that for us is about a 3-month process. We call that like phase 1 and 2. From there, we start getting a baseline of someone's macros. Okay, now that you've created the foundation with the food and the frequency, and things are starting to shift with how you feel, you're creating consistency. We're seeing shifts in your temperature and pulse, which, is looking at not only are we converting the energy we're taking in, but are we regulating our blood sugar? Are we regulating adrenal health? Are we converting thyroid hormone, etc.? Then we start looking at their macros. Okay, what are you taking in? Great. Let's start fine-tuning your grams. Let's start fine-tuning your ratios, then your calories. And in the end, over that next 3 months, we come to a place where we have their own individualized macros. So now we know that every day when they eat, they're meeting their own individual needs. Now, of course.
And real quick, just for people not familiar with the jargon, what are macros?
Macronutrients would be like the amount of nutrients of carbs, like in an orange, or protein in a piece of chicken. Like an egg is 7 grams of protein, 4 grams of fat, right? So that would be a macro. But it's like at the end of the day, like today, a client, it was our last consult, and we're working, and she is taking in about, which works for her, believe it or not, it's about 1,700 calories, and it's broken up between carbs, proteins, fats. But we're making sure that that's divvied up in a way at each meal throughout the day that she's supported. So we really look at each meal versus just the end of the day, right? And to us, that's really important, because if you're just eating metabolic food, how do you know it's going to work for you? I mean, foundationally, we do in the beginning because you have to. You have to make sure you just kind of play with it. But then as we progress, we need to make sure that like you're getting what you need from protein, carbs, and fat at each meal, because you could eat eggs and a bowl of fruit, but what if you're not getting enough protein to meet your needs based off what you do, your activity level, your stress level, etc., right? So we really individualize it in that sense.
Gotcha. Okay. So food frequency, and then macros. So protein, carbs, fats. Is there any other piece to this overarching structure? I have some questions like digging into some of the specifics here, but do you want to?
That's like the general part of it. Okay. I mean, in a nutshell, there's a lot to it. That's like a 6-month process, because you have to like really fine tune. We have this philosophy, we have science, we're applying it to a human in real life that has kids and they work, etc. Right? So it takes a little bit of time to get comfortable with the foods, pay attention to what's working, what's not working, look at, why their temp's going up and their pulse is going down, whatever it may be, right? Okay. And start kind of fine tuning through the process, so we're always meeting their needs and learning through the way, so we know when they need to eat, what foods work, etc.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, from what you've said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you've been heavily influenced by Ray Peat. Is that accurate?
He's one of our influencers. I mean, there's many. I mean, a lot of people, I'll be honest with you, he's influenced our work, and a lot of people, I would say years ago, kind of say, oh, you're a Ray Peat. We don't even want to be associated with any of that, for specific reasons. But, we love his work. We think his work is beautiful, and it's influenced our work tremendously. But he's not the only one. There's a lot of people between like Hanselier, Constance Martin, Dr. Weatherby, who's up in Oregon, like all these different people, as well as just like normal physiology, but he is one of, our influences for sure.
Gotcha. So when it comes to macronutrients, do you have any sort of general macronutrient pattern or template that you start from for pretty much everyone, or does it differ for anyone? Do you do everything from high carb, low fat to keto and low carb diets, or what's your take on that?
Yeah. So it's most people look at macros as, okay, let me type it into a formula. It's going to tell me what I need. Right. And that's, to me, in a sense, you're chasing you're chasing. So what we do is we listen to the body and it tells us what we need. So from that food, from the frequency, right, working with that, then we log the macros, like of that log, let's say of week, you know, of that 3-month log, and we see what they're taking in and we start fine tuning it, right? So we get rid of all inconsistencies and we whittle it down. So we come to a place where we find their own individual macros through that logging process, right? Which is through creating awareness and listening to the body. So it's different for everyone, but to answer your question, we don't promote keto, paleo, any of that. Our diet is definitely, I didn't want to use the word high carb, but we promote, like in a meal, your carbs would be greater than your protein, greater than your fat. That's kind of one of our rules.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean excessive carbs. I think a lot of people get wrapped up in what we say or what even Ray Peat says, and they think you need excessive amounts of carbs to regulate thyroid health. And I think that's 100% false. You need carbs and specific carbs, but you don't need excess, because excess means you're in a low protein diet, and that excess is a stress to the system. It's going to create a very hyperinsulinic state. But if we're talking about like a professional athlete, they might need 400 grams of carbs, right? And this is where it gets very person specific. Like my client today, she takes in about a range of, like, depending on the day and activity, it's about 130 and 150 grams of carbs. That's not a lot, in my opinion, you know, but for her is what works.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all that matters.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, so carbs, one of the basics rules is carbs are greater than protein, greater than fat.
Mm-hmm.
So by definition, if that's a rule, then you would basically stay away from low carb and keto diets and those kinds
100%.
of approaches. So can you talk about why you're not a fan of those diets? I mean, they're kind of all the rage right now. A lot of people are very into that. Why are you not on board with that trend?
Well, number one, it's a trend, right? Methods are many. How many methods are there? Keto, paleo. I mean, keto was designed in, I think, the 1920s to treat epilepsy.
Yeah.
Of course, as Americans, we just bastardize everything. So we've taken it and said, okay, well, we can actually lose weight by doing it. Just like the feeding tube diet. That was like super popular in LA at one point. I don't know if you knew that, but people were actually doing, I think it was 14 days or 30 days, but they would actually get a feeding tube. And those specific doctors that would administer it. But they're all trends. They're all methods. So there's a gentleman named Brian McKenzie that I follow, and he says, methods are many, principles are few. And that's exactly what we teach. There's a million methods out there, but we're trying to teach nutrition based off the principles of the human body, right? And that's what we're doing. So when you look at the human body, you know that the body needs carbs. The liver doesn't store energy for shits and giggles. It does it because it needs to convert thyroid hormone. That's where 80% of thyroid hormone is converted. There's some in the gut, etc. So there's a reason for that. Just like the stomach releases hydrochloric acid, it doesn't do it just because it wants to. It does it because it does it so we can break down protein. You don't eat protein, you don't release hydrochloric acid. So if you look at how the body works, you know what we need. So when we look at things like keto and intermittent fasting, if you want to lose weight, do it. But you're going to lose weight at the expense of damaging your metabolism. And what happens over time, whether it's a month or a year, you're going to get tired. Your libido is going to go away. You're going to have sleep issues, hormonal issues, gut issues. It's going to spiral out of control because they're not sustainable. If you were like a like a competitor, which is not healthy, and you wanted to lose weight fast, do keto, intermittent fast, of course, right? But it's not a sustainable way of eating because it's going to throw our body into survival mode. Our body is going to start to eat itself to provide for itself because you're not meeting its needs. And that is called a catabolic state. And when you're in that state, we can get scientific, but it's simple. Anytime you're in a catabolic state for a prolonged period of time, anything that's anabolic drops. Thyroid hormone, progesterone, testosterone, progesterone. I don't know if I just said that, but everything drops. They're inverse, right? This is why, at least I'm working with guys that are 25 that have low testosterone. And their doctors are saying, you need to go on TRT. No, you don't. You're 25 years old, right? Or women that don't get their cycle and they're 34, right? Because they've been on the roller coaster every day for the past 10 to 20 years, and they have trauma after trauma after trauma. So when you look at that, it makes a lot of sense. So we just have to build the body back up. And that's what we're trying to do. Does it take a little bit more time? Yes. But do you learn a lot along the way and reconnect with self? 100%.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned before was, I believe, correct me if I'm phrasing this incorrectly, but you said something to the effect of teach people how to get their liver storing glycogen again.
Yes.
So I'm under the impression that the average American, even, unhealthy standard American diet eater is their liver is already overloaded with glycogen. So what's the disconnect there between my impression and what you're saying?
Right. So it really depends on the person, right? So I think some people are, but what we look at is body temperature and pulse. It's that simple, right? Because if you're storing energy, you're going to convert it. Or, right, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because I always say, who are we talking about, right? Some people are storing it, but they're not converting it, right? And these are those very hyperinsulinic people. But we look at body temperature and pulse. We look at body temperature and pulse. So if someone has a low body temperature and pulse, to me, they're just not storing glycogen, especially if we could say they have a very unstable body temperature and pulse, meaning like they wake up at 97, they eat, they're at 97.5, and then they're at 96.2, and then they're at 97.8. That instability is a sign of blood sugar regulation. I don't know if you've studied the work of Broda Barnes, but he talks a lot about that instability.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. I went down the Ray Peat rabbit hole many years ago and got into his work, Broda Barnes, Matt Stone, a lot of that stuff. So in the case of somebody who has these kind of pulse and body temperature fluctuations and which implies blood sugar regulation issues, are you looking to solve that issue with increased meal frequency?
Food and frequency, yes. And that's person dependent, because for some people that's 4 meals. For some people it's 5. Some people it's 6. And when we say meals, I'm including snacks, right? Mm-hmm. It's all individualized based on the person, their activity level, and the healing state they're in. That doesn't mean everyone that comes to me stage 1, they're getting 6 meals. No. It's a very slow titrated process. But I think most people have a very hypometabolic state, and they're being diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. They're being diagnosed with SIBO. They're being diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And in my belief is, number one, they don't have hypothyroidism. They have a conversion issue.
What does that mean for people unfamiliar with the terminology? What does a conversion issue mean?
I've been doing this 18 years, and I would say in 18 years I've worked with maybe 5 people with true hypothyroidism, which means the thyroid is not producing thyroid hormone, right? Now that's how doctors look at hypothyroidism. You have high TSH, you have hypothyroidism. You have low TSH, you have hyperthyroidism. That is so inaccurate, it's insane, but that's how they look at it, right? Because you can have low TSH and have a metabolic conversion issue, not hypothyroidism. So what we really work with and believe, based on our work of 18 years and looking at body temperature and pulse, is most people have a conversion issue, which means you need certain minerals, you need glycogen to convert thyroid hormone in the liver, to take inactive thyroid hormone T4 to convert it to active thyroid hormone T3, right? And that's used in our cells to produce energy. So there's things like stress, overexcited HPA axis, not getting right minerals, you're not storing glycogen, estrogen recirculation, all these things affect conversion, as well as a huge one, going to see the doctor. I don't feel good, I'm tired. We do a thyroid panel. Oh, your TSH is high. Here's your T4. The problem is you don't need it. So that pushes you into thyroid resistance, right? Which affects the conversion of thyroid hormone. So what we're seeing is a lot of people on medication when they truly didn't need it. How do we know? Because their temperatures and pulses are not that bad, and they're unstable. When they're unstable, we know it's blood sugar. When someone comes in and let's say they wake up with a 96 temperature and a 60 pulse, and they eat and they work with us and they work with frequency, and after 3 months, they're 96 temperature and a 60 pulse. It's stable. It has not moved. We know it's a true thyroid issue. 18 years, I've maybe seen 5 people. And those people need the thyroid hormone because they're not producing it, right? And I'm not saying my goal is to get people off medication. My goal is to support them enough so they have the resources to start converting it. And usually what we see is this. I have a rapid heart rate. I can't sleep anymore. I have like this jittery feeling all day, right? Now we know their medication's not working and they're converting thyroid hormone. So they talk to their doctor, we titrate them off, but now they have a foundation to support that, right? Because now they have the resources, we've changed the environment and they're good to go versus not changing that and trying to go off, all hell breaks loose, right? They don't feel good. They have no energy. So yeah. The conversion issue is you're producing it, you're just not converting it.
Gotcha. So when it comes to blood sugar fluctuations, we want to use. So what you're saying is you want to use meal frequency to avoid those fluctuations.
Inconsistency
to that person.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the concept? Well, actually, maybe before I ask that, what are your thoughts on fasting? You know, fasting and intermittent fasting have become quite popular. It sounds like, based on what you said, that this would be something that you would oppose. Is that correct?
100%. 100%. And I know people always go, oh, there's so much research to show that fasting is just awesome. Well, there's research to show that medications are healthy, right? There's research to show that ABCD, vaccines are this and that. And I mean, we could go on and on and on, and we know the answers to that, right? So I don't want to say I don't care, but there's a part of me that doesn't care. For me, I look at the person in front of me, and everyone that comes to me, whether they believe it or not, or they're doing it consciously, is fasting, right? What do? They eat dinner. They don't eat all night. They wake up, they have a cup of coffee, and they don't eat till 10, 11, 12 o'clock. Is it working? It's not working, right? And we know that when we fast, what happens? We're going to stimulate that stress response, that acute stress response, right? That physiological response. And if we do it long enough, we're going to start to suppress the immune system, right? And that's why I say, like, everyone has an immune system issue. Why? Because people are, like, I'm not sure who came up with this concept, but it's like, I'm human and I have an issue or a goal, so I'm going to stop eating food, or I'm going to stop eating certain foods. I'm not sure who came up with the concept because it's super reductionistic and it just doesn't make sense to me. I can't even wrap my head around it. You know, it's like, I'm sick, so I'm going to stop eating food for 16 hours. What? If anything, you need food. If your child was sick, would you say you're not going to eat for 16 hours?
Do you want me to answer that, actually?
Sure.
My answer to it would be, if there were rigorously controlled experiments showing that was superior in terms of actual outcomes, then I would discard my theories and my paradigms and do what the research shows is best.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes the world go round, right? Because I don't live like, and that's where I think a lot of people, like, I live my life based on who my son is, right? And who I am. And, you know, if someone wants to fast and they think it works for them, that's fine. Like, I have nothing against that.
Yeah.
I just know who comes to me and the people that I talk to every day, and every one of them is a vegan. Every one of them, I just got off the phone with a guy who's fasting, you know? I look at the person in front of me and say, what they've been doing isn't working. I'm just going to do the opposite, right? And most people are fasting, like I said. I look at people's logs. That's part of their initial intake. People don't eat enough protein, right? They're eating processed carbs. They're eating buttloads of fat, if not unsaturated fats, right? And they're eating 2 to 3 meals a day. So what am I going to do the less or do the opposite? Do the opposite, you know? So if someone wants to fast because they think it's good for them, that's awesome. You know, I think the most important piece of life is just doing what you think is right for you. That's what makes us individual. If you copy everyone, you know, I don't want a million Joshes running around. I want people to do what they want to do. But I also want to work with people that are committed to change. And if someone's fasted and it hasn't worked, I'm not going to just do the same thing. Or if someone comes to me on 45 supplements, I'm not going to start recommending more supplements or better supplements. But I always go back to different things, and I always go back and say, is it working for you? How do you feel? Right? How are your sleep patterns? How's your libido? Right? And most people say, good. Well, it's because you're living on adrenaline initially when you're fasting. But take your body temperature and pulse in 3 months when you wake up. That's the kicker, because the body doesn't lie. We can believe something. We can believe that we need to be vegan or fast. The body doesn't lie.
Yeah. I have a lot of things on my mind, but one thing that I'll ask is, so it sounds like your paradigm is kind of an anti-stress paradigm. The goal seems in this paradigm seems to be avoid stress. Stress is bad.
No.
Okay.
No, we need stress, right? Okay. Stress is not a thing. It's a physiological reaction. Okay. We should, as humans, that builds resiliency. Stress doesn't kill us. It's our perception of it, right? We're trying to create more balance in people's bodies so they're not always in that heightened state. So they can come back to homeostasis and go, oh, I skipped a meal, or there's a trauma, whatever it is, work through it and come back instead of keep going.
Yeah. So, but we're framing fasting periods where you're going without food and maybe having a drop in blood sugar, or low carb, and maybe emptying glycogen stores and that sort of thing, as stressors. And those are things to be avoided because they're putting the body in a stress state. What do you think of exercise? Because but doing exercise also creates a stress response in the body.
Right. But you have to do the right type to meet your body's needs. You can't just say, go exercise. I think everyone needs to move, right? Okay. It's finding the right so we can adapt to the stress and build resiliency, right? Okay. So if you said to Joe Schmo that came in with a 96 temperature with IBS, oh, you should start doing CrossFit. That's going to be more of a stress. That's going to be a big stress that could create injury or even more metabolic dysfunction. But you might say to him, we need to figure out what type of movement you can do that's going to meet the needs of where you're at, so it can build resiliency, right? Maybe push you out a little, bring you back in, right? But also support where you're going. So you're not always, because that would put you back on the roller coaster, right? And we use body temperature and pulse to guide that. And we look at what people are eating throughout the day so they can create that environment to support the movement that they're doing. So we'll say to someone, do what you want to do. And of course, if it's unrealistic, I'll say something, but I want my clients to move. And I'll say 30 to 45 minutes after working out, take your body temperature and pulse, journal how you feel, right, after the workout, and we'll talk about it. Because I want my clients to leave their exercise and say, that felt good. I feel invigorated, not holy crap, that kicked my ass. Mm-hmm. As well as, I don't want to see a normal temperature and a high pulse. That's typically what you're going to see, right? That means you're on that roller coaster again, right? So you want to see a little bit more of adaptation where maybe your pulse was raised in the exercise, but 45 minutes later it's coming down because now you're adapting. You're not compensating, right? So it's all about meeting the person where they're at.
Gotcha. So exercise can be a beneficial type of stress.
100%.
What's the distinction there between exercise and fasting? Why is fasting something to oppose? Why, in other words, why are you not seeing occasional fasts in the same way that you see exercise as a potentially beneficial metabolic stressor?
I think it depends on the person and where they're at. If someone said to me, Josh, like, I want to fast 1 day a week and not eat in the morning, that's fine. But I think the consistency of it, based on working with people for so long, I just have seen it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I have to look at the people I work with and the people I talk with and what I see, and based on, I consult with clients all over the world. That's my business,
Right.
So I talk to these people day in and day out, and most of them have fasted. So from my point of view, it doesn't work.
Right.
But if someone said, hey, like I'm doing, like my goal is not to say to people, you have to be 100%. Like if someone said 6 days a week, I'm doing your approach, but like one day where I want to meditate in the morning and I don't want to eat until like 10, as long as they're regulating and they feel great and their temps and pulses are great and they're sleeping and it's working for them, great. It's their journey. Like if it's working, it's working, you know? But most people are fasting without knowing it, meaning if I'm teaching someone my approach, my goal is not to say I want you to be 100%. My goal is to say there's going to be a time where you miss a meal. There's going to be a time where you maybe wake up and you're not hungry because of an emotional stress, or you're in a rush, or whatever it may be. Your daughter is sick, whatever it may be. That's okay, because you've taught your body to adapt and you've built enough resiliency to support that. That's the whole goal. I'm not trying to teach people to be OCD and neurotic. I'm trying to teach people how to create balance.
Gotcha. Yeah. So a couple things. One is I think there's an interesting effect where different people who are out there preaching different approaches to health and nutrition, if they have a particular message and they're strong on certain points, they tend to attract a certain kind of person as a result of that. So I'll give you an example. You know who Matt Stone is?
Yes.
Okay. So Matt Stone attracts based on his message of sort of saying, hey, diets don't work. People can't lose weight. Come with me. I'll help heal your metabolism. He attracts people who specifically a very specific kind of person that has multiple failed attempts at dieting and is ready to hear this message of diets don't work. You can't lose weight. There's no reason to even try. Okay. And that's his perception of what kind of person is out there. I think you also have like keto people who are saying keto's the best path to fat loss, who are encountering these people who are, you know, probably a lot of people on the standard American diet who perceive themselves to be eating a high carb, low fat diet. Not a very well designed one, but that's what they think, is that there was this low fat era. Everybody went low fat. None of it worked. And so that's nonsense. Really, keto's the answer. So I'm going to go keto. So they attract those kind of people that claim to have failed with low fat, high carb diets. And now they're ready for the magic of keto. And the same with, you know, vegan diet gurus. So what I'm saying is different sort of diet gurus attract a particular kind of person, and then they end up perceiving that kind of person as that's what everyone out there is. But I will say I'm not really hardcore in any particular diet camp, so I attract a pretty good diversity of people. But what I'll say is I've seen massive failures and health problems on a pretty wide array of dietary extremes. So everything from keto to veganism to, you know, repeat approaches. And like I've seen people take everything to an extreme where it can become toxic.
100%. And that's what we're not doing.
Yeah.
You know, we attract everything from vegans to fasters to people with gut issues, hormone issues, cancer, tumors. I mean, we attract so many different people. But like you said, we believe the journey of health, and that's why I don't want to be associated with like repeat people, because they take the journey of health and make it unhealthy. Right? As with a lot of people. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to help people create balance. So I have my philosophy, but it depends on who's in front of me, the intensity of how it's rolled out, they're doing it, etc. Right. It depends on who's in front of me and how deep I go or how surfacey I go. If they're male or female, you know, and my goal is to help people create a journey that is fun and they get back to the enjoyment of eating food. So food doesn't control their life. It's a part of their life. Right. And I'm trying to help people create balance because I agree with what you said. Our industry is insane right now. It is so, and I feel bad, I'm compassionate, but I talk to so many people that are just like, whoa. I can't, it is, I'll just be like, I would love to work with you, but unfortunately I can't. Like, they just need help, because people are so wrapped up with what they read on the web, and it's gotten them, they've created so many different webs, and it's just out of control.
Yeah.
And they're their own worst enemy. They're in their way. So we're trying to get away from that. We have our philosophy, but it's different for everyone. The intensity is different, so and I say it a million times when I talk to people, because of what we post or what's out there, we're helping people create balance. I want people to have fun, and I want people to enjoy the process, and I want people to find balance so it's a part of their life and it becomes healthy, and they're not like, oh my God, I ate a piece of pizza, or oh my God, I missed a meal, or oh my God, like I missed my carrot. What am I going to do? Like, I don't want to teach that. That doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have one more diet specific question for you, which is on feeding and fasting windows. So it sounds like you're kind of an advocate of more frequent feedings and longer periods of eating during the day. I'm just curious how you would interpret some of the studies that show like increased cancer rates in people who have longer feeding windows during the day. For example, there's studies, for example, in women where they've looked at thousands of women and showed higher breast cancer rates. There's other similar studies, but that's—
What are they eating?
What
are they eating?
Well, they're not controlling for that in the—
What's their history?
What I'm saying, it's not a randomized controlled study. So they're looking at outcomes, and hopefully they're controlling for confounding variables, like there are big differences in terms of what these people are eating. I would completely agree with you, and I will grant you that a longer feeding window with healthier food choices is less likely to result in bad outcomes than a longer feeding window with bad food choices. But nevertheless, there's this research showing that longer feeding windows are associated with some bad outcomes. So how would you—
When you say longer feeding windows, you mean like you're eating more throughout the day?
Yeah, like, so having a 14 or 15 or 16 hour feeding window of the day, which is the period of time of the 24 hours of the day from the first bite of food to the last bite. I'm not the type of person that reads research all day. I'm just not. I don't find it doesn't— I don't want to say I don't believe in it, but I just find that a lot of research is either funded by large corporations, or there's too many questions that I have, like I just said. What are they eating? What's this person's history? What are their stress levels? Like, so you're telling me food causes cancer? Come on. Like, that's not the only cause of cancer. There is, and you look at the cause of cancer, it's a defect at the cell level. It's not a thing, right? And there's many reasons that could contribute to someone causing cancer. You have people that claim they had cancer because of an emotional issue. You have people that say because it was plastics. You have people that say it was because of food. You have people, it was deodorant. I just have too many questions. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I really can't comment on it,
Gotcha.
Because I don't know what they were eating. Were they eating tons of vegetables? Was their blood sugar being regulated? What was the state before they started doing this? I don't know. There's just too many questions for me.
Gotcha. So my last question to you is, I know that you have certain breathing practices that you recommend to help oxygenate the body. Can you talk a bit about what those practices are, or maybe even, I don't know if you're willing to do this, but maybe guide people through a quick few-minute practice of how to do some of these breathing exercises?
Yeah, so we use it with people because we know that our cells use oxygen as well as thyroid hormone to produce energy. Well, the only way oxygen can get there is two ways. When we breathe through our nose, because our nose is meant for breathing, our mouth is meant for eating, right? That doesn't mean you can never breathe through your mouth. But it tells us the state of your energy system, right? You're in a heightened state. You're in a more sympathetic state, right? So it tells us a lot about someone. And most people are breathing through their mouth, and they are hyperventilating. So what does that tell us about people just at rest? It tells us a buttload. But we know that if we breathe through our nose, we get oxygen in the system, and we prevent the excess loss of CO2. We're still getting rid of CO2, but we're preventing the excess loss of it. Same thing when we eat in a way that, like I talked about, our cells start producing energy, which is, of course, based off the work of Rhoda Barnes, and that's what we're seeing in body temperature and pulse. That is important because energy is CO2. So what CO2 allows us to do is pull hemoglobin away from oxygen so we can use oxygen at the cell level and keep that feedback mechanism going. So respiration, whether it be through ventilation or at the cell level, has to be married in my belief in order to create not perfect health, but health. Because if you think about it, beside just perception and mindset, they're really the only two ways you can tap into the autonomic nervous system. Yes, people have different devices and techniques, but I'm talking about using the body, using just simple things like breath and food. So it allows us to really tap into the nervous system and strengthen vagal tone and auto-regulate that system. So it's very personalized. And we use a CO2 tolerance test, which tells us how well people are tolerating CO2. So for instance, someone would inhale and exhale through their nose like 3 or 4 times, and then, they have their phone in front of them. And when they start exhaling, they press stop on a stopwatch. They, as slow as they can. And when they stop, they hit stop, right? It doesn't matter if you think you can go super slow or not. If you don't have a tolerance to CO2, you're going to be at 10 to 15 seconds, right? That tells us you're not producing energy and you're not using oxygen at cell level. You're not getting oxygen to your tissues, your brain, your cells, etc., right? Which, of course, we know is a problem when we talk about healing, health, performance, cognitive function, etc. From that, and if someone could do like 45 seconds, that's awesome. So that tells us kind of like where they start, because think about it. Everyone out there is saying, okay, what you need to do is do a 4-second, then a 7-second exhale and a 4-second hold. Or you take yoga and they're like, inhale for 10 seconds. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like, I can't do that. It's because you're in a very compromised state, but they're just throwing a number out there. So we're using a tempo to individualize the person so we can help them adapt and build their resiliency. And maybe someone with a 10-second, CO2 tolerance test is going to start at like a 2 tempo. And someone with a 45-second is probably going to start at like a 7 or 8 tempo, right? And there's different breathing protocols. Like there's your typical inhale, exhale. So like it would be a 2-2, or that higher person would be like an 8-8. Or you could do like a 2-4, which would be inhale and then exhale for 4 seconds all through the nose. And when you exhale slower, you're stimulating more of the parasympathetic system, right? Or the 45-second person, they would do an 8-16. So there's different tempos depending on really what we're trying to do. Are we trying to just create balance? Are we trying to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system? Are we using it to regulate a stress response? Are we doing it before sleep? Are we trying to retain more CO2? So it's very individualized based on the tempo, but a good one that we use, and believe it or not, like I'm not saying I have claim to fame to these, because a lot of the tempos are taken from different philosophies. I've just kind of put my own spin on them, and I've created some of my own. But a good one is a base tempo is a 1-1-2-1. Right? That's a base tempo. It's almost like a pranayama. So depending on where someone's CO2 threshold is, let's just use a low person, right? That would be a 2-2-4-2. Does that make sense? So if you start at 1-1.
I know what you mean, but I think it would probably be good to explain what you mean by those 4 numbers.
So it'd be if we start with a 2-2-4-2, right? So if the baseline is a 1-1-2-1, right? So that third number is just doubled, right? So if you start with a 2, you just double it. So it'd be 2-2-4-2, right? So it'd be an inhale for 2, hold for 2, exhale for 4, hold for 2, right? And for a lot of people, that's challenging. They're going to feel like you're suffocating. And that's why the tempo is so slow. And you don't want to feel like you're suffocating. But, it's very important. It's a great tempo because we're slowing the breath rate down. We're getting oxygen in the system. We're stimulating more of the parasympathetic than the sympathetic. And with the breath hold at the end, we're retaining more CO2, right? Which for a lot of people that are hyperventilating at rest, which they are, because they breathe through their mouth. It's key. So I use a lot of breathing tempos to help people metabolically in the morning, during the day, especially at night with sleep. And I found it to be very profound. Of course, if you study the work, Buteyko and all the different, there's a million different breathing books. I think I've read every single one of them. Stephen Porges, like all those different things, studying the nervous system. I think it's amazing. And I use it with a lot of people because it's very grounding, just emotionally, but it really helps them metabolically to support that path that we're on, because you're tapping into that involuntary system. And now you're taking that car that's an automatic and you're making it a standard. And now you're in control of your body.
Nice.
So for the people listening, I think the best thing to do to start would be like, just inhale slow through your nose and try to exhale slow, but make that exhale 2 times longer. Just start like that. That's the easiest thing you could possibly do, and do it at night when you get into bed. Our Instagram page is Real Food Gangsters, but our metabolic breathing page is Metabolic Breathing. So you can learn more about it there.
Your Instagram page is Real Food Gangsters?
Yeah.
Nice. I love that. So that's my last question to you would just be, where can people find more of your work, and how can people get in touch if they want to work with you?
So our website is eastwesthealing.com. We offer a free 15-minute consult, so you can fill out that, little box when you see it. We also have a free download on our website. Our Facebook is East West Healing. You can find all this on our website. And like I said, our Instagram is Real Food Gangstas, like gang and then STAS.
I didn't pronounce it correct. I use gangsters. I'm too proper.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I came up with that like a while ago, and then I was thinking about changing it. And then when I was contemplating it, we started getting like a lot of followers. Like in the past, like since the beginning of the year, we've gotten about 1,500 followers. So it's starting to really pick up. We post every day. We do stories. So we're pretty active on it, and everyone seems to like it. So I'm like, I'm just going to stick with it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh. I've enjoyed this conversation, and best of luck to you in the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
You too.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.